The rock samples were not going to sort themselves, and Reed Calloway had already decided he did not care. He sat on the narrow wooden porch of his outpost with a scanner in one hand and a cooling cup of something that used to be tea in the other, running geological data from the eastern ridge onto a small screen balanced on his knee. The numbers were fine. They were always fine. The ridge was stable, the ground below it was stable, and the whole moon of Ardenvale had been stable for 600,000 years, which meant Reed's job was mostly just to confirm, in writing, that nothing had fallen apart since last week. He had been doing this for 3 years, alone. The forest in front of him was dark in the way that only a forest on a moon could be dark, total, deep, and breathing. The gas giant above Ardenvale gave a faint orange glow to the sky even at night, but none of that light reached past the tree line. The trees on Ardenvale were old and dense, and did not care about gas giants or colonies or geological surveys. They simply stood there and absorbed everything. Reed was used to the dark. He was used to the silence. He had chosen this outpost specifically because it sat at the farthest edge of the human colony, where the sound of other people could not reach him unless the wind was wrong. He was about to go inside when he saw the eyes. They were not together, which was the first strange thing. One was amber, warm and steady like a lit coal. The other was violet, pale and cold, and somehow thoughtful. They floated in the dark at the edge of the tree line, about 40 meters away at roughly knee height. They were watching him. Reed did not move. The eyes did not move. This went on for a long time, long enough that Reed's scanner finished its cycle and chimed softly, and he did not look at it. Long enough that the cold in his cup settled completely. He sat with his hands in his lap and looked at the eyes, and the eyes looked at him, and neither of them seemed to feel the need to do anything about it. Then, without any sound at all, the eyes blinked out. Whatever had been holding them was gone, back into the forest, leaving nothing behind but the dark and the distant hum of the colony generators 2 kilometers east. Reed sat on his porch for another 10 minutes after that. Then he went inside, wrote nothing in his field journal, and went to sleep. The next night, the eyes came back. They were closer this time, maybe 35 meters instead of 40, same patience, same silence. Reed watched them from his chair on the porch and noticed, this time, a faint outline, small, low to the ground, shaped roughly like a crouching animal. Silver scales caught the faint orange light from the sky in tiny flashes, there and gone, like the thing was breathing. Reed went inside and came back with a piece of dried protein ration. He set it on the bottom porch step. He sat back down. The eyes watched the ration for a very long time. Then they retreated into the forest. In the morning, the ration was gone. He did not tell anyone in the colony. He was not sure why. There was no rule against feeding wild animals on Ardenvale, and plenty of strange fauna lived in the forests that the Dominion had never fully catalogued. But something about the way those eyes had looked at him, the stillness in them, the attention, made him feel that mentioning it would be wrong in some way he could not put into words. So he kept it to himself. He left food on the step each evening before he sat down with his scanner, and each night the eyes came back a little closer. By the end of the second week, they were close enough that Reed could see the creature clearly in the faint skylight. It was small, smaller than he expected, given the weight the gaze carried. It had 4 limbs and a short tail and a narrow, angular head that sat on a neck slightly too long for its body. Its scales were silver-gray, almost white near the chest, and they caught light in layers, one over another, like a stack of thin mirrors. It could not have been more than 4 months old by the look of it. It was a Virath, a dragon hatchling. Reed knew what a Virath was. Everyone on Ardenvale knew, because the Draveth Dominion made certain that humans understood one thing above most others. The Virath were theirs, bred, conditioned, and owned. They were not wildlife. They were not pets. They were instruments of an empire that had been expanding for 300 years and had no intention of slowing down. Finding one alone in the forest, unwatched and uncollared, was not something Reed had an easy explanation for. He did not reach for one. He just sat there, watching her watch him, and eventually he said, quietly, to no one in particular, You pick a bad neighborhood to wander into, little one. The hatchling tilted her head, the amber eye and the violet eye both fixed on him with an attention that made his skin go slightly cold, not because it felt threatening, because it felt like being read. She came back the next night, and the night after. Reed kept talking to her, low and even, the way he used to talk to his survey crew when equipment was failing and everyone needed to stay calm. He talked about the rock samples. He talked about the gas giant's rotation cycle. He talked about nothing important, and she stood at the edge of the lantern light and listened. One evening she was close enough that Reed could see, along her left flank, 3 long scars, old ones. The edges were too clean for claws or teeth. They had been burned closed by something mechanical, something precise, and they sat against her scales like ink strokes. Someone had done that to her deliberately. She turned slightly and let him look. She did not run. She simply stood and let him see what had been done, and then she looked at him with those 2 mismatched eyes as if she was waiting for him to understand something. He wrote in his field journal that night, for the first time since the visits began. He wrote, "She trusts me just enough to show me she has been hurt." He sat back and read the sentence, and then looked out the window into the dark where she had been. The next morning, Reed was in the colony square picking up supply crates when 3 Dominion transports came down through the cloud cover and landed in the administrative yard. Soldiers in dark plate armor fanned out in neat lines, and behind them came a figure in a gray command coat who walked like he had never been in a hurry in his life and never needed to be. Commander Dravath. Reed knew the name, everyone did. Dravath stood in the center of the yard and spoke to the colony administrator about security assessments and perimeter protocols, his voice flat and clean and completely empty of anything that sounded like concern. He said the patrols were routine. He said the Dominion was simply being thorough. He did not say what he was looking for. Reed stood at the edge of the square with a supply crate in his arms and watched Dravath's eyes move across the colony buildings, across the people, across the tree line in the distance, slow and methodical, like a man running a scan. Reed thought about the silver scales and the mismatched eyes and the 3 clean scars on a hatchling's flank. He thought about the food on the porch step, gone every morning. He picked up his crate and walked back toward his outpost, and he did not look over his shoulder, because he already knew that Dravath was still watching the tree line long after everyone else had gone back inside. Wren Calloway had a habit of showing up unannounced, which was something Reed had never been able to fix about her, even when they were children sharing a hab unit on a colony 3 systems away from Ardenvale. She would walk in through whatever door was unlocked, assess the state of the room with one sweep of her eyes, and tell her brother exactly what she thought of what she found. She arrived at his outpost on a Tuesday afternoon, the way she usually did, with a medical kit on her shoulder and the look of someone who had decided she was not going to say anything upsetting until she had finished her inspection. She was done in about 30 seconds. "You slept," she said. Reed was at his workbench sorting core samples and did not look up. People generally do. "You haven't in years," she said. "Not properly, you look different." She set her kit down and crossed her arms. "You're eating too. There's actual food in your storage unit, I checked." "You went through my storage." "I'm a medic, I check things." She sat down across from him, watching his face the way she always had, like she was reading something he didn't know he was broadcasting. "What changed?" Reed lined up 2 core samples side by side and said nothing. Wren let the silence sit for a while. She was good at that too. "Something out there." She said finally, nodding toward the forest. It was not a question. "Rock formations are interesting this time of year," Reed said. She looked at him for another long moment, then let it go. But she did not look like she had actually let it go. She looked like she was putting it somewhere to come back to later. The Dominion patrols grew that same week. Reed noticed them first from the ridge during a field scan, 3 soldiers moving through the lower forest about a kilometer south of his outpost, walking a grid pattern that was methodical enough to be a search. The next day they were closer. The day after that, he saw Dravath himself standing at the eastern tree line with a scanner in his hand, pointing it at angles that suggested he was not looking for anything large. He was looking for tracks. Reed went back to his outpost and thought for a while. Then he got out a terrain smoother from his geological equipment bag, a flat tool that used low-frequency vibration to level ground before core drilling, and he spent 3 evenings working the soft earth around his outpost's porch and the clearing beyond it until there was not a claw print or a tail drag mark left anywhere near the building. He did not think too carefully about why he was doing this. It felt like the right call in the same simple way that leaving food on the step had felt right, so he did it and did not argue with himself about it. Sova had started coming earlier, not just at the edge of dark now, but while the sky was still fading from orange to deep blue. She had also started coming closer, not just to the porch step, but to the porch itself, sitting at the bottom of the steps with her long tail curled around her feet while Reed sat above her and worked through his evening scans. She watched him eat. She watched him write. One evening he reached past her to close the porch storage box, and she tracked his hand the whole way there and back without moving her head, just her eyes, steady and following. One night Reed read aloud. It was an old habit, from when he'd had a survey crew, 6 people who worked long nights in tight quarters and kept each other awake with books, articles, arguments about geology and food, and whatever was happening back in human space. He had not done it since the accident. But that particular evening, he had a technical report on Ardenvale's tectonic history on his screen, and he started reading through it out loud without really deciding to, the way you do when you're tired and your eyes need the help of your voice to stay focused. He was 4 paragraphs in before he noticed that Sova had gone completely still. She was not resting, she was not relaxed. She was sitting perfectly rigid at the bottom of the steps with her amber eye and her violet eye both locked onto his face, and she was watching his mouth the way someone watches a lock when they're trying to understand the mechanism. Her nostrils were faintly moving, taking in the sound, and every time Reed paused to scroll down the page, her stillness sharpened in a way that was almost like impatience. He kept reading. Meanwhile, Ren had gone back to the administrative wing for a medical supply run and ended up waiting an hour in a side corridor while a systems tech ran a slow database update on the dispensary. To pass the time, she leaned against a wall console and browsed through accessible facility records, looking at nothing in particular, and turned up a file that had been misfiled between 2 inventory logs. The header was in Dominion script, which she could read passably after years on Ardenvale. It said, VYR80H Prime, containment status, escaped. Below that, a case number, a date from 8 months ago, and a line that had been partially corrupted. Asset considered critical. Recovery, AT all. The rest was inaccessible behind a clearance level she did not have. She did not know exactly what she was looking at. She knew what a Virath was. She did not know what a Prime was. But she copied the file to her personal data chip with the calm efficiency of a medical professional copying a chart she didn't understand but suspected was important, and she tucked it away without telling anyone. That same night, Reed was sitting on the porch when Sova walked up the steps. Not to the bottom step, up all 3 steps, onto the porch itself, and she sat directly in front of him with the kind of deliberateness that left no room for accident. She looked at him for a moment, then lowered her head slowly and pushed her snout forward until it was within reach of his hand. She held very still. Reed breathed once, carefully, and then laid his hand flat against her snout, just his palm, flat and open. Her scales were warm, smoother than they looked, and she was shaking very slightly, not from fear, from the effort of holding still while something she wanted very badly was finally happening. She exhaled. The breath came out slow and even, and the sound it made was unlike any animal sound Reed had heard. It was patient. It was the sound of something that had been waiting a long time and was only now, carefully, beginning to stop. Reed kept his hand there until she lifted her head. He did not write in his journal that night. He sat in his chair inside for a long time after she left and looked at the wall, and eventually he fell asleep in the chair, which was the deepest sleep he had managed in 3 years. 3 days later, a supply vessel docked at the colony port. Among the passengers who came off the ramp was an old man, tall, slow-moving, with grey-green scales and the long, narrow face of the Dravath reptilian species. He was not in uniform. He carried one bag. He did not check in at the Dominion administrative wing. He checked into a small room at the colony's civilian guest house, and he sat in it for the rest of the day with the door closed. His name was Voss. He had not come to Ardenvale on Dominion orders. He had come because he had spent 8 months following the traces of something he had hidden, and he had finally found where it had gone. He did not know yet whose porch it had chosen or whose hand it had let itself be touched by. But he knew that whoever had found a Virath Prime alive and uncollared on a frontier moon needed to understand, as quickly as possible, exactly what that meant. He sat in his small room and folded his hands and waited for the right moment, the way old scientists learn to wait, not with peace, but with the knowledge that there was no faster way. Somewhere between the 14th and 15th visit, Reed started leaving the lantern on. He told himself it was a practical decision. The porch steps were uneven, and he had nearly tripped over his own scanner cord 3 times in the dark. The lantern was just good sense. He set it on the railing before going out each evening and did not think about how it made a small warm circle of light in the black forest edge, visible from a long way off, like a signal. The first gift appeared on the 9th day after that. Reed came out in the morning to find a flat grey stone sitting on the bottom porch step. It was the size of his palm, smooth on one side, rough on the other, and shaped in a way that was slightly too specific to be accidental. The silhouette of it was narrow at the wrist and wider at the fingers. It looked unmistakably like a human hand. Reed picked it up and stood with it for a while. Then he set it on his workbench inside. The next morning there was a piece of bark on the step. Someone had scraped the surface of it with a claw tip in 6 careful parallel lines, not random scratches, even spacing, a pattern. The morning after that, a broken circuit board, small, cracked at one corner, still showing a partial data routing diagram etched in silver. Reed recognized the material immediately. It was Dominion manufacture. He had seen the same circuit architecture in the patrol scanners Dravath's soldiers carried. He set all 3 items on his workbench in a row and looked at them together. He looked at them for a long time. He went and found Wren. Wren came to the outpost with her data chip and a cautious expression, and they sat across from each other at his small table while she pulled up the file she had copied from the administrative terminal. Together, in the grey afternoon light, they read through everything the partial document would give them. Virath Prime, the phrase appeared 3 times in the recoverable sections. What they could piece together was partial and clinical, and still enough to make the room feel different. A Virath Prime was not a category of combat asset. It was a biological event, a rare genetic configuration that the Dominion's breeding program had been working for generations to prevent. The standard Virath could be conditioned, trained to a handler, bonded to a purpose, directed. The Dominion had refined that process over 2 centuries until it was nearly perfect. A prime could not be conditioned. A prime formed its own mind, developed its own understanding, and chose where its loyalty went. Not based on conditioning, not based on training, based on something the file described in dry scientific language as autonomous cognitive selection, which was a careful way of saying the creature decided for itself who it trusted. The Dominion killed every prime at birth, had been doing so for 400 years, ever since the last one had emerged and refused to follow orders, and nearly split the Dominion military command in half by choosing sides in an internal conflict based on its own judgment of who was right. The containment file said the current prime had escaped 8 months ago. It said recovery was authorized at all costs. It said the asset was considered a critical risk to Dominion's structural integrity. Wren looked at Reed. Reed looked at the 3 objects on his workbench. "She brought you a piece of their own equipment," Wren said. "She's been teaching me," Reed said. "Since the beginning, I didn't understand what I was looking at." He picked up the stone shaped like a hand, She was showing me she knew what I was, what shape I was. He put it down and touched the bark with the parallel lines. This one I haven't figured out yet. Wren was quiet for a moment. 6 lines, she said. Like tallying, she looked at him. How many nights has she been coming? Reed counted in his head. They looked at each other. She's been keeping track, he said. Wren left before dark, which Reed was grateful for. He needed to sit with what they had learned, and he needed to do it alone because he did not know yet what it was going to do to him. A mind that chose. An intelligence the Dominion considered a structural risk. Something that had spent months in the dark watching a solitary human geologist eat bad food and read geology reports out loud, and had decided, for reasons Reed could not fathom, that he was worth counting the nights for. He was still sitting there when it got dark. He had not turned on his scanner. He had not eaten. He was holding the stone shaped like a hand and turning it over slowly in his fingers when the familiar warmth of lantern light reflected on silver appeared at the edge of his vision, and he looked up to find Sova already at the top of the porch steps, watching him. Reed set the stone down on the table in front of him. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, not softly, not carefully, but straight and level the way he used to talk to his crew when they needed to hear something clearly. I know what you are. I read the file. I don't know if that matters to you, but I want you to know that I'm not afraid of you, and I'm not going to report you, and you don't have to keep standing at the edge of the steps. He pulled the chair beside him back from the table with his foot. Sova looked at the chair. She looked at him. She walked forward and sat beside him, not on the chair but beside it, her shoulder at his eye level, close enough that he could feel the warmth coming off her scales. Then she was quiet for a very long time. Reed sat still and let the quiet be what it was. When she moved, it was slowly. She dropped her head slightly and her throat moved. Her jaw shifted, opening and closing with small precise motions that were completely unlike the jaw movements of any animal sound she had ever made on his porch. It looked like someone solving a mechanical problem with great care, testing angles, adjusting pressure, working out how a shape could be made by parts that had not been built to make it. The sound that came out was low and rough and not quite right, and then it came out again slightly better, and then a third time, and the third time it was unmistakably a word. Raider. His name in his language, with his own cadence, the short vowel and the double D landing with the same flat weight he heard in his own voice when he said it. She had been listening to him say his own name every time Wren called him across the porch, every time the colony comms picked up, every time he muttered to himself at his workbench. She had been learning it in the dark, alone, for months. And now she had said it out loud, and she was watching his face with the amber eye and the violet eye and the focused patience of something that had worked a very long time for this moment. Reed sat very still. Then he said carefully, "Yeah, that's me." She exhaled and looked away into the dark forest like she was giving him time to deal with whatever he needed to deal with, which was considerate of her because he very much needed a moment. 2 kilometers away, a Dominion patrol scanner registered a faint trail in the smoothed earth east of the colony perimeter, not a claw print, but a disturbed pattern too regular for wind. Dravath studied the readout in his command tent and marked the location on a map with a small red point. Then he drew a circle around it. Then he drew a slightly larger circle and noted that Reed Calloway's outpost was inside it. He did not move yet. He was a patient man. But he marked the map, and he did not go to sleep for a long time. There was a knock at Reed's outpost door before sunrise, and it was not Wren. The old Dravath scientist on his doorstep was wearing a plain grey coat and carrying nothing in his hands, which Reed registered first as a deliberate choice. An old man who knew exactly how alarming it was to find a Dominion species on your porch before dawn and had done everything he could to look harmless. His scales were faded with age, light grey-green, and dry-looking at the edges, and his eyes were the pale amber of old glass. He was taller than Reed by half a head, and bent at the spine in the way of someone who had carried heavy things for decades, and was now carrying only habit. "My name is Voss," the old man said. His human language was careful and slightly formal, the way it got when someone had learned it from books rather than people. "I am not here with the Dominion. I need you to understand that before I say anything else, I came off a civilian vessel. I have no military clearance active. I have not reported my location to Commander Dravath, and I do not intend to." Reed looked at him for a moment. Then he opened the door wider and stepped aside. Voss came in and stood in the middle of the room, and his eyes went immediately to the workbench, to the stone shaped like a hand, the carved bark, the broken circuit board. He looked at them for a long time without speaking, and something in his face settled, like a man who has been traveling toward an answer for a long time and has finally found it. "She brought you those," he said. "You raised her," Reed said. "It was not a question." From the egg, Voss sat down in the chair Reed pointed to, slowly, the way his knees asked him to. "I was the primary keeper assigned to her clutch. I falsified her genetic screening results at the first assessment. If I had not, she would have been terminated within a week of hatching." He folded his hands on the table. "I told the archive she had been disposed of. I placed her in the forest 6 kilometers from this colony 8 months ago, with enough food cached to last her through the first month, and I returned to my station and waited to hear that she had been found." "You never heard," Reed said. "She hid from the Dominion patrols, all of them, for 8 months. Voss looked at the objects on the workbench again. "She did not hide from you." Reed sat down across from him. "Why me?" The old man was quiet for a moment. "I cannot answer that with certainty. The prime configuration is not well documented because the Dominion has been eliminating every instance of it for 400 years. What I can tell you is that a Virath prime does not form a bond through proximity or conditioning. It forms a bond through assessment. She watched you. She decided what you were." Voss looked at him steadily. "Whatever she concluded, it was in your favor." Reed thought about the stone, the bark with the tally marks, the circuit board from a Dominion scanner she had pulled from somewhere in the forest and laid at his feet like evidence. "She wasn't just watching me," he said. "She was testing me." "Yes," Voss said, "and you kept passing." He paused. "She spoke to you." "Last night." The old man closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were very still. "Then we have less time than I hoped. The speaking is not something she could have hidden. The Virath voice has a resonance that Dominion scanners are calibrated to detect. If any patrol equipment was within 2 kilometers. There are patrols running grids east of my outpost," Reed said. Voss stood up with the careful urgency of someone whose body had opinions about fast movement but was overruling them. "Then we need to talk quickly, and you need to decide quickly, because Commander Dravath is not a patient man, and he is very close to knowing exactly what he is looking for." They talked for 2 hours. Voss told Reed what he knew about the last Virath Prime, a creature that had lived for 300 years and had eventually died not in battle, but of what the Dominion official record called containment complications, which meant something Reed did not ask Voss to clarify. He told Reed what a Virath Prime's intelligence looked like at full development, not in years, but in decades, a mind that built itself layer by layer, that would eventually surpass the cognitive capacity of any conditioned Virath the Dominion had ever produced. He told Reed that Sova was, right now, in the equivalent of early childhood, despite everything she had already demonstrated. "She will grow into something the Dominion cannot manage," Voss said quietly. "That is why they kill them, not because they are dangerous, because they cannot be owned." Reed was still sitting with that when Dravath's patrol appeared on the eastern ridge. It was mid-morning. Reed saw them from his window, 6 soldiers in patrol armor moving toward the outpost in a loose formation that was trying to look casual and not succeeding. He told Voss to go to the back room and stay away from the windows. Then he went outside, sat on his porch with his scanner, and waited. Dravath came with them. Reed had not expected that. The commander stopped at the porch steps and looked up at Reed with the flat eyes of a man who had decided something already and was here to confirm it. He said it was a routine perimeter check. He said the colony's proximity to uncharted forest sections required regular inspection. He said it in the tone of someone reading from a script they had written themselves and found boring. Reed said, "Sure, come in and look around." He sat on his porch and ran geological scans while 4 soldiers moved through his outpost with scanners and opened every cabinet and ran every standard check. He kept his face neutral. He had learned neutral from 3 years of processing his grief quietly, alone, in a room with nobody to notice. He was very good at neutral. Voss was not in the back room. Reed had moved him. Voss was in the geological equipment storage shed behind the outpost, sitting behind a crate of core drill heads, with strict instructions not to make any sound at all. Dravath found nothing. He stood in the middle of Reed's outpost for a moment, looking at the workbench, and his eyes went to the stone and the bark and the circuit board. He looked at them with the same stillness Reed had seen in Sova's eyes, which Reed found uncomfortable in a way he could not name. Then he looked at Reed. "You spend a great deal of time out here alone," Dravath said. "I'm a geologist," Reed said. "The rocks are out here." Dravath left, but one of the soldiers at the rear lingered a moment beside the porch post and did something with his hand that Reed only noticed later, when Wren arrived and swept the room out of habit with a scanner she kept in her kit for reasons she had once described as general paranoia. The monitoring device was small. It was attached to the underside of the porch railing, tucked against the join where the post met the beam. It had been broadcasting for 4 hours by the time they found it. Wren removed it carefully and looked at Reed with an expression that was trying to stay calm and mostly managing it. "He doesn't know what he got from this yet," she said. "It's a passive sensor. It logs thermal signatures and ambient sound. He'll review it when he's back at command." "How long until he reviews it?" 6 hours, maybe less." Reed nodded slowly. He was about to say something when he noticed that Sova was not at the tree line. She was not at the tree line because she was not outside. When he went back inside, she was under his workbench, curled in the narrow space beneath it with her tail pulled in and her head tucked low, watching him from the shadow with both eyes. She had come in through a gap at the back wall, low down where the panels joined the foundation, a gap no wider than Reed's forearm that she had clearly known about for weeks, maybe longer. He knelt down beside the workbench. She looked at him. "Reed," she said softly, the same word but steadier than the night before, less rough, like she had spent the hours between practicing it. Then, after a pause, a second word, slower, more careful, like she was assembling it from pieces she had been collecting for a long time. "Stay," she said. Reed stayed. That evening, 6 kilometers away, Dravath sat in his command tent and pulled up the sensor logs from the monitoring device his soldier had placed. He scrolled through the thermal data, 2 human signatures, one slightly smaller, moving around the outpost through the afternoon. He was about to close the file when the log from an hour after the patrol's departure registered something that made him stop. A third thermal signature, large, low to the ground, positioned inside the outpost beside the human male. Far too large to be a pet, far too warm-blooded to be equipment, and the shape of it, rendered in the flat colors of thermal imaging, was unmistakably the silhouette of a Virath. Dravath did not say anything. He sat in the quiet of his tent and looked at the data for a long time. Then he picked up his communicator and gave an order to his unit commander in a voice that had gone very quiet and very even, the way it did when he had made up his mind. "Full unit mobilization. Move at first light. Outpost Callaway, eastern perimeter." He closed the communicator and looked at the thermal image again, and for the first time since arriving on Ardenvale, he felt something very close to certainty. Tomorrow it would be over. Reed did not sleep. He sat at his workbench with the lamp on low and worked through what he knew, which was not a long list but was enough. Dravath had a thermal signature. By morning, that signature would have a name, or at least a shape that matched the Virath classification in the Dominion's own databases. When it did, Dravath would come. And when Dravath came, he would come with soldiers and a containment unit and a legal authority over Virath assets that the human colony had no official power to challenge. That was the position on paper. Reed made tea, which was something he did when he needed to think without pressuring himself to reach the answer immediately. He set the cup on the workbench, and Sova watched him from beneath it, with those two mismatched eyes following every movement with the calm of something that had decided to trust a specific human and was going to see that through regardless of what happened next. Voss was sitting against the far wall with his long legs folded and his old hands resting on his knees. He had not spoken since Reed had explained the thermal log. He was watching Reed with the same kind of attention Sova used, which Reed was beginning to understand was not a coincidence. The old scientist had spent years with a creature that never wasted its focus, and some of it had rubbed off. "What can you legally do?" Voss asked finally. Reed looked at him. "Me personally, or humans on Ardenvale generally?" "Either, both. As colonists under Dominion Charter, we have territorial rights over the colony perimeter, commercial and civilian structures, and anything designated as a humanitarian facility. We can't obstruct a Dominion military operation. We can't claim ownership of a Dominion asset." Reed turned the cup in his hands. "But there are things above Dominion jurisdiction, the interstellar charter, the press relay networks, the monitoring accord." He paused. "I need 4 hours." Voss looked at him for a moment. "What are you planning?" "I'm going to make this a problem Dravath cannot solve by force," Reed said. "Not because I'm stronger than him, because force in this situation would cost the Dominion more than they're willing to pay in public." He got up and calmed Ren. Ren arrived in 20 minutes, which meant she had been awake already, which meant she had been thinking too. Reed explained the plan in short, clean sentences, and she listened without interrupting, which was not her usual approach to anything Reed said, but the situation had clarified her priorities considerably. She called the colony medical administrator and spent 45 minutes on the comm getting the outpost retroactively registered as an extension of the colony medical facility, which was a designation that placed it under the monitoring accord's humanitarian site protections. The administrator had questions. Ren answered them with a specific kind of focused patience that Reed recognized as her version of the voice he used during equipment failures, and by the end of it, the registration was logged in 2 separate interstellar systems. Reed, meanwhile, was doing something else. He had 3 contacts outside Ardenvale, a survey coordinator on the orbital station, an independent freight operator who ran the supply runs, and a journalist he had met once at a colony conference 2 systems away who had given him a comm address and said to use it if he ever had something worth saying. Reed had never used it. He used it now. He sent her the Virath Prime file, not to publish. He staged it on a timed relay, set to broadcast automatically to 2 independent press networks in 12 hours, unless Reed personally sent a cancellation code. He explained this to the journalist in plain language, including what the file contained and why it would matter to approximately 47 civilizations who were party to the Interstellar Charter's sapience protections and had been waiting for a test case for 200 years. The journalist commed back in 4 minutes. She said, "Understood, timer is running, do not get yourself killed." Reed said he would try. The colony engineer, a solid man named Bowden who had been fixing things on Ardenvale for 15 years and had a deep personal dislike of Dominion patrol routes cutting through his maintenance roads, sealed 3 access approaches to the eastern perimeter with what the incident log would describe as simultaneous equipment failures in the ground lock systems. The seals would not hold against military breaching tools for more than an hour. They did not need to. They needed to slow the patrol enough for Reed to be standing on his porch with a data pad in his hand when Dravath arrived, rather than being surprised in his bed. Reed explained all of this to Voss in pieces as it was happening, moving from the comm to the door to the workbench and back, with the steady efficiency of a man who had spent years managing crises in the field with inadequate equipment and no backup. Voss watched him. At one point he said, quietly and almost to himself, "You are doing all of this for a creature you have known for 6 weeks." Reed stopped. He thought about the tally marks on the bark, about a small silver shape inching closer across a dark clearing over the course of 14 nights, about a word said in the dark with perfect care by a jaw that was not built for it. "She counted every night she came," he said. "She kept track of every single one, She wanted me to know she had not taken any of it lightly. He looked at Voss. I owe her the same. Voss was quiet for a long time after that. Sova had not moved from beneath the workbench through all of it. She watched everything, the comms, the data pad, Ren packing near the window, Reed moving in and out. She watched with the careful, comprehensive attention of something that was not merely observing, but cataloging, filing, understanding more than her age should have allowed. When Ren knelt in front of her near dawn and said in a low voice, "We're going to get you out of this, all right, all three of us. You just need to stay here with us." Sova looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Reed across the room. Then she looked back at Ren. "Ren," she said. The name came out right. Not approximate, not rough. Right. The W landing clean, the vowel exactly where it belonged. Ren did not cry. She put a hand flat on the floor and pressed it there a moment, and her jaw tightened, and she breathed once through her nose. That was all. Dravath came at first light. 12 soldiers, 2 vehicles, and a containment unit that was a compact but recognizable piece of equipment. A cage assembly designed for Virath transport, mounted on the second vehicle's flatbed. They came through what remained of the sealed access approach with professional efficiency and assembled in the clearing in front of Reed's outpost in under 2 minutes. Reed was already on the porch. He was standing with his arms at his sides and a data pad in his right hand, and he looked at Dravath coming across the clearing the way he looked at a geological formation that was going to require careful handling, not afraid of it, aware of exactly what it was. Dravath stopped at the base of the porch steps. His soldiers fanned out on either side without being told to, which was good discipline. The commander looked up at Reed with eyes that had already decided how this was going to go. Reed spoke first. He told Dravath that the file had been staged on a timed relay. He named the 2 press networks. He cited the Interstellar Charter Clause, Article 14, Section 3, Emerging Sapient Entity Protections, and the 47 signatory civilizations. He explained, clearly and without drama, what it would look like in interstellar public record when a Dominion commander ordered the seizure of a Virath Prime on a human colony world, while a timed file countdown was active, and 3 independent monitoring systems were logging the event. He said, "You can breach the door, I can't stop you, but I can promise you that by the time you get her back to Dominion Command, there will be no version of this that ends well for anyone above your rank." The clearing was very quiet. Dravath looked at the data pad. He looked at Reed's face. He was a cold man and a careful one, and whatever he had expected from a solitary human geologist on a minor colony moon, it had not been this flat, unhurried, absolutely serious offer of consequences, delivered by a man standing alone on a porch with a cup of cold tea visible on the railing behind him. He did not give the breach order. He stood in the clearing for a long moment, then took one step back, just one, a commander's step, not a retreat, a reposition. "I need to consult High Command," he said. "Of course," Reed said. The soldiers held position. The containment vehicle sat in the clearing with its engine idling. Dravath walked back to his vehicle and got in and closed the door. Reed went back inside. He sat down next to Sova, who was still under the workbench, and he put his hand flat on the floor between them. She placed her snout against it, very gently, and they stayed like that while the sun came all the way up over Ardenvale and turned the forest from black to gold. Outside, Dravath's unit waited. Inside, Reed and Sova and Ren and Voss waited also, and it was a different kind of waiting entirely. It was the kind where you have already done everything you can think of, and now you trust that it was enough, and if it wasn't, you start thinking of the next thing. Reed was already thinking of the next thing. He was human, it was what he did. 6 hours after Dravath walked back to his vehicle, High Command responded. It did not come as a military order. It came as a diplomatic inquiry, a formal request for information, filed through the Dominion's Interstellar Relations Office rather than its military command chain. Reed read the phrasing twice and understood immediately what that meant. Someone above Dravath had looked at the situation, looked at the files staged on a 12-hour relay, looked at the list of charter signatories, and decided that the word military should not appear anywhere near this until they knew what they were dealing with. The inquiry had 3 questions. 1. How was the Virath Prime still living, given the containment report filed 8 months ago? 2. Who had enabled its survival, and under what authority? 3. And this was the part that Reed read 4 times because he wanted to make sure he understood it. What did the human intend to do with the asset going forward? That 3rd question was the crack in the wall, not a big crack, but a real one. Reed sat down and wrote a careful response. The days that followed were not comfortable, but they were manageable, which was all Reed had asked of them. Dravath's unit remained in the clearing, reduced to 4 soldiers after the first day, then 2, then a single vehicle parked at the tree line with nobody in it who seemed particularly eager to do anything. Dravath himself moved back to the administrative wing and communicated with Reed through formal channels, which suited both of them. Voss gave a full account to the High Command inquiry. He did not lie and he did not minimize. He described exactly what a Virath Prime was, what it was capable of, and what the Dominion's own breeding records showed about how many had been eliminated before they could develop. He described Sova's behavior in the forest, her deliberate concealment from Dominion patrols, her approach to Reed, and the 12 weeks of structured tests she had conducted on him before allowing contact. He described the gifts, the tally marks, and the first word. The inquiry team was quiet for a long time after that last part. Reed, meanwhile, had been on the comm with a great many people he did not know. Wren's contact in the Colony Medical Network had a friend in the Interstellar Legal Office. That friend had a colleague who handled non-standard sapience cases under the Interstellar Charter, a woman named Ada, who had spent 20 years waiting for someone to actually invoke Article 14 and had opinions about it that she was very ready to share. It took a week and a half and enough comm hours to exhaust 3 data subscriptions, but in the end, filed through the Interstellar Charter body with signatures from Ada and 2 colleagues and the colony administrator and Wren and Reed, there was a designation. Sova, female Virath Prime, Ardenvale Colony, was registered as an independent sapient entity under Article 14, Section 3 of the Interstellar Charter of Emerging Minds. The clause had existed for 200 years. It had never been used. A small note in the founding documents explained that it had been written by a committee of 7 species who believed, philosophically, that the capacity for autonomous thought and self-directed loyalty was the definition of a person regardless of biological origin, and who had put the clause in because it seemed right and assumed it would never be needed. They had been wrong about the second part. The Dominion did not recognize the Interstellar Charter. Reed had known this from the beginning, and he had also known from the beginning that this was not actually the point. The Charter was recognized by 47 other civilizations, 7 of whom had trade agreements with the Dominion that they would prefer not to complicate, and 14 of whom had press networks that had already picked up the staged file, because Reed had let the 12-hour timer run, because Dravath had not given him a reason to cancel it. The file was out. The designation was filed. Sova's existence was a public record in 47 legal systems. The Dominion could still try to take her, but it would cost them, and they would have to want her badly enough to pay that cost. What Dravath's inquiry to High Command had revealed was that they did not want her that badly. What they had wanted was a quiet resolution to a security risk. What they now had was a public record that made the security risk considerably larger if they acted aggressively than if they did not. They negotiated. It was not a good negotiation, in the sense that Reed did not get everything. The Dominion did not formally acknowledge Sova's designation. They did not admit that they had been eliminating prime-class Virath for 400 years. They issued a statement about a lost hatchling found in unusual circumstances on a colony world, and they accepted a position of what their diplomat called indefinite monitoring of the entity's development, which meant they would be watching and they wanted Sova and Reed both to know it. Reed was fine with that. Sova, when he explained it to her, and he explained everything, because he had learned already that she understood far more than she could yet say, listened with her head slightly tilted, and then said, with the precision of someone selecting words from a growing but still limited vocabulary, "They are watching to see if we become a problem." "Yes," Reed said. She thought about it. "Are we a problem?" "Not yet," Reed said. "Maybe eventually." She seemed satisfied with this. Voss left on the same supply vessel he had arrived on 3 weeks after the negotiation closed. He stood at the colony port in his plain grey coat and shook Reed's hand, a gesture he had clearly practiced specifically for this occasion, and then he knelt down to Sova's eye level, which cost his knees considerably, and they looked at each other for a long moment in the way of two people who had shared something important and were not sure how to contain it in a goodbye. Sova said his name, just that. Voss pressed one hand briefly against her silver forehead, and then he stood up and walked up the ramp without looking back, because sometimes that was the only way. He had said to Reed the night before while they sat on the porch, "She will keep learning. There is no ceiling. Do not try to find one for her." Reed had said he would not. The colony grew in the weeks after that, not by dramatic numbers, but steadily, people who had heard about what happened and made their own quiet decisions about where they wanted to live. A geologist from the orbital station, a pair of engineers from a colony 2 systems over, a teacher who said she had been looking for somewhere that needed one. The colony administrator, a practical woman named Bria, who had been running the settlement for 11 years and had seen most things, looked at the numbers one morning and told Reed that his outpost had apparently become a landmark. Reed said that was extremely inconvenient and went back to his rock samples. It was a month after the negotiation, on a night when the gas giant was rising full and orange over the horizon, and the forest was making the low rustling sound it made when the upper canopy was moving in a high-altitude wind, that Sova said what she had clearly been working toward for some time. They were on the porch. Reed was not working. He had not brought the scanner out. He was just sitting, which was something he had started doing again, sitting without a task in front of him, just being somewhere, and Sova was beside him, pressed warm against his left side, watching the sky with the same comprehensive attention she gave everything. "More of them will come," she said. "Dominion, more than before." "Probably," Reed said. She was quiet for a moment. "Are you afraid?" He looked at her, the amber eye and the violet eye, and the absolute unshakable patience behind both of them, the patience of a mind that was going to keep growing long after Reed was gone and had decided, somewhere in 14 nights of watching a lonely man eat bad food and talk to himself, that this was where it wanted to be. "Are you?" he asked. She considered the question with the gravity she brought to everything, not quickly, not dismissively, but with real weight, as if the answer deserved to be built properly before it was given. "No," she said, "you are strange creatures. You make things work when they should not work. I have been watching you do it since the beginning." Reed snorted. "You were watching me eat dinner." She looked at him with the specific expression she had developed for when he said something she considered beneath a proper response. "I was studying your problem-solving," she said, with complete dignity. He laughed. He had not laughed easily in 3 years, and this came out easy, without effort, the way things do when they belong to the moment. Sova tucked her head against his shoulder with the deliberate gentleness she used for things she had decided were important, and she was warm and solid and present in the way of something that had found its place and settled into it fully. The gas giant finished rising. The forest moved in its slow, patient way. The lantern on the railing was on, the way it always was now, making its small circle of light in the dark. She had come to him hiding, small steps through the dark, closer every night, carrying a secret so large it could split an empire, choosing him for reasons she had tested and measured and confirmed over weeks of careful watching. He had stayed. He had left the light on. He had said, "I'm not afraid of you," and meant it and earned it. In the end, that was the thing the Dominion had never understood about humans, the thing no empire built on conditioning and control could ever quite account for. They looked at something strange and frightened in the dark, and instead of reporting it, instead of containing it, instead of categorizing it as a threat and processing it accordingly, they left food on the step. They left the lantern on. They sat on their porch and talked about nothing important to something that was learning to understand them, and they just kept showing up, night after night, until the strange and frightened thing in the dark decided that it wasn't alone anymore. They kept showing up, that was all. It turned out that was enough to change everything.